Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of The Bullet. My name is Paul Lathrop. I'm the Deputy Director of New Media for the Second Amendment Foundation. Joining me today for the first time in a while, Craig DeLuzand coming at us from California. Craig, are all those things behind you California compliant?
Under the advice of an attorney, I will plead the fifth. But I am coming from an undisclosed location that may or may not be within the state of California.
There you go. There you go. I want to remind everybody as we get started that if you are watching on the Polite Society podcast feeds, either Facebook or YouTube, comment on the live video. We'll get your comments up. We'll get them on the air. We'll discuss them live. If you're catching us anywhere else, OpsLens or anywhere else that picks us up, go to Twitter. It's safe now. Elon owns it. Go to Twitter, tweet with the hashtag #TheBullet. We get those just as fast. We'll get those comments up, and we'll discuss those as well. Craig, the one story that hit me this morning that kind of surprised me, I was so busy yesterday afternoon with the interview I had with Adam Kraut last night and getting ready for that. When this story broke yesterday, I didn't catch it until this morning. Yesterday, Santa Clara County Sheriff Lori Smith resigned right now. Seems that her corruption trial, it wasn't going so well, and she turned in a one-sentence resignation to the board of something or another. And as she's out of office, she had refused to resign before, wasn't running for office again, but she's gone now. She quit.
Well, it's interesting because she's not running for. She's up for re-election this year. She's not running for re-election, but she's decided to end her term early because normally the new sheriff wouldn't take office until the end of this year. But evidently, it sounds like the trial wasn't going real well. She probably needed to focus her attention on that because if she did not focus her attention on that, she might go from serving time there in office to serving time in a 6x9 cell.
She needs to. She really does. For what she's accused of doing, there are governors in the state of Illinois that have spent a few years in prison.
Oh, well, and here's the thing. That's not an unusual thing. Graft becomes almost a common thing for people who spend too much time in office. When you look at Washington, D.C., and you see some of these folks who arrived in Washington, D.C. with no money and are leaving multi-millionaires off of, $150,000 to up to $150,000 a year salary. I just think that after a while you get too used to doing stuff, and in particular, in this case, we're talking about scratching people's back. And how this affects gun owners, for those of you who are wondering, a lot of this surrounded concealed carry permits, in which if you were part of the corporate elite there within her county and a campaign donor, if for somehow in an area that is very, very anti-gun, anti-concealed carry, seemed like you had no problem getting a concealed carry permit.
As long as you provided the sheriff's department hundreds of iPads, or you contributed to her re-election campaign, or gave her box seats to the hockey stadium, or something like that.
Yeah, it was bad. It just got to the point where it was just really bad. And it's been particular when you're talking about a fundamental right. We now know the Supreme Court has said, look, the right to bear arms is a constitutionally protected right. We already knew it was an enumerated right. Now we know it should be a protected right. And to trade off of that fundamental right is inexcusable. But once again, she's not the first California sheriff. I believe that there was a sheriff down in Los Angeles who did some time in the Hooskow for pretty much the same thing.
Yeah, I'm certainly hoping that this eventually turns into that that at the very least she has to wear an ankle bracelet for a while, and spending some time behind the other side of the gray bars would be just yes.
Yes. Well, Lee Baca out of Los Angeles was not that long ago, and you would have thought that she would have learned and at the very least cleaned up her act following what happened to Lee Baca. But as we see, she didn't. And well, now he's like, "You gonna learn today," and that's what she's dealing with right now. She's going to learn, and hopefully, some of these other sheriffs who are trading on once again on constitutionally protected rights will get in line, especially since now you don't have a legitimate reason to deny someone who, once again, if they can pass a background check, you don't have a logical, legitimate reason to turn them down.
Sure. Next story I want to get to, Craig. This one came off of Reason.com. Seems like the ATF, if you would think that there was a place that was safe to have firearms, it would be the ATF. Looks like the ATF between 2016 to 2019 has lost thousands of firearms and firearms parts. Since September 2015, the ATF has utilized the National Disposal Branch, formerly the National Firearms and Ammunition Destruction Branch, to centralize and streamline the disposal process of forfeited and ATF-owned firearms. Each year, ATF destroys thousands of firearms at NDB. And anyway, due to an audit, because one of the security guards working there was busted taking home several of these firearms, they did an audit, and thousands of firearms and firearms parts are missing from ATF. And this is the same ATF that is now going to, if you make a paperwork error as an FFL, you're in serious danger of losing your license. This is an agency that just needs to go away, Craig. What do you think?
Oh, I definitely believe it's an agency that needs to go away because it's been politicized. It used to be, or it was supposed to be, an agency that helped people comply with, or helped, in particular, FFLs or individuals comply with federal firearms law. That's not what they do anymore. In particular, under the Biden administration, it has become a way in which to close down and end the livelihood of those entities and organizations and individuals that help facilitate the exercising of a constitutionally enumerated right, this being the Second Amendment. But this is not new for a law enforcement agency. We already know that whether it's state, federal, or even local agencies across the country, there have been articles where they've just, firearms just disappearing. Hundreds of thousands of firearms nationally. They have no idea where they are. They have no idea what happened to them. They're just gone. I mean, if an individual FFL ran their business the way some of these agencies run their business and the way in which they track their firearms, they not only would be out of business, they would be in jail.
Yes.
And yet and still, these folks are the ones who, by the way, are now enforcing these laws.
To tie between the first story and this story, again, the federal, well, not federal, but a person in authority abuses that authority, or just, in this case, frankly, doesn't follow up with their authority and deserves punishment. So yes,
right.
I mean, again, the argument from the anti-gun side has always been only the police and the feds, or only the police and the military should have guns. Well, the ATF, the federal branch that's supposed to have the ultimate authority over firearms, alcohol, tobacco, firearms, and explosives, they're the ones losing thousands of guns. Thanks. I'll keep my own.
Which, by the way, raises the question: So I wonder how much, alcohol, tobacco, and explosives they've actually lost.
Yeah, yeah. If they're missing any C4, exactly. Next story I got. This one came off of the Daily Record out of Maryland. Maryland's got at least 2 federal lawsuits coming up. SAF has got one, and Firearms Policy Coalition has got one. And they're going after Maryland's assault weapons ban, and they're going after the licensing scheme that Maryland has going. Maryland's going to be very, very busy in the federal courts coming up over the next about 6 weeks, because they're scheduled for oral arguments the beginning of December. Let me see here.
It's funny. I see a lot of times whenever we talk about lawsuits, whether I'm doing it on behalf of the Firearms Policy Coalition or you and I are talking, there's always inevitably those comments from people from various different states. Why haven't you filed here? Why haven't you filed there? Maryland seems to be one of those states we get a lot of question about. Well, now that we are under the new New York Rifle and Pistol v. Bruin standard, you're going to start to see suits being filed against some of these unconstitutional gun laws in places where they haven't been filed before. And that's because the likelihood of winning those lawsuits, of being successful, in particular even at the lower court level, has dramatically increased.
Oh, absolutely it has. I can't speak to Firearms Policy Coalition, but I can speak to the Second Amendment Foundation. Right now we have 40 federal lawsuits active. That's not small potatoes, and I know Firearms Policy Coalition is equally active in the courts.
Well, exactly, and in some cases we're suing the same people over kind of the same thing, because Firearms Policy Coalition is coming at it from a different perspective, because as you know, or as anyone who's watched these shows where you've had lawyers on and they talked about these lawsuits, you're really limited in terms of number of pages, the amount of filing, the amount of arguments that you can make. So having other organizations suing, even if it's for the same thing, but coming at it from a different perspective, can make all the difference in the world in terms of being able to make a complete argument to make some of these bad laws go away. Yeah.
And by the way, add Gun Owners of America in there, who's filing some lawsuits now, specifically in New York. The news about legal is going to continue, I believe, over the next 2 years to be almost a daily thing. We'll have legal news to report on.
Well, and that's the thing it's always been hard to talk about legal, because for the longest time it was you file a lawsuit, and it still kind of is. You wait months and months and months, or in many cases, some cases years, before anything happens with that litigation. And a lot of times, you have certain lawsuits, man, that are, we're talking 10 years, 15 years before they finally get settled. I'm hoping what we'll start to see is some of these things are going to move faster. What I'm wondering is if some of these lawsuits that are being filed are still going to move this slow, but we're trying to get them in before there's any sort of a change in the makeup of the Supreme Court. Because let's be honest, Justice Thomas is no spring chicken.
No, he's not. But I'm hopeful that he stays on for at least 80 or 90 more years. And I believe the man is nearly 80 now. So, and here's my concern. We're coming up. We are 1 week today from Election Day.
Right.
There's talk of a red wave coming, and we'll see what happens. I don't. My crystal ball broke when I had my stroke. I do not claim to know what's going to happen a week from today. If there is a red wave, if the House is lost to the Democrats and the Senate goes 2 to 3 seats towards the Republicans, so that there's a solid Democrat loss in the Senate and a total loss in the House, which kind of the seems likely. My concern is this: we're going to end up with a lame duck session that gives us the gun version of Obamacare. That we're going to get a packed Supreme Court or something like that.
Well, so what will wind up happening, and this is going to be the question, is, the only thing that's really going to change is if Republicans take control of either house, then what you're going to see is no legislation really getting moved, in particular legislation that's going to have a big impact on our Second Amendment rights, with the exception of maybe red flag laws, because that's really the only thing that you've seen any Republicans express any willingness to support, and which, by the way, that's no small deal. I still am a firm believer that is nothing more than gun confiscation, and I've yet to see a red flag law proposal that would pass constitutional muster in my eyes. Now, having said that, if Republicans take control of, even if they take control of both houses, including the Senate, unless they are willing to, unless you have a filibuster-proof majority, you're not going to get anything passed. You're not going to have anything actually pass out of Congress that's going to resemble solid pro-Second Amendment legislation. And quite frankly, unless you have 2/3 of the Senate and the House, you're not going to be able to overcome any sort of a veto by President Biden. The number one thing, though, that we're going to be looking at that point is judicial appointments.
Yep.
What are judicial appointments going to look like? And are we going to do as Republicans have traditionally done and said, look, we're advising consent, and if a person is qualified, then even if we disagree with them on the issues, on their positions, on their legal positions, then we will approve them. That's historically where Republicans have been. Now, Democrats, on the other hand, have tended to, when they were in control, have tended to say, you know what? I don't care if you're qualified. If I don't like you, I will not approve you. And they'll keep them from being able to become, in particular, appellate judges or even Supreme Court justices.
Look at what
so
happened.
The best we can hope for is to not have a rubber stamp of Biden appointees to the judiciary.
Look at what happened the last 2 years of Obama's term. We very nearly had a Justice Garland. But the Republicans said, we're not going to do this. We're going to wait to see what comes out of the election. Right. We're not going to give Obama his person. And it could be Trump getting that person. It could be Hillary. Thank goodness it was Trump. That's what got us the Bruin decision. So, well, I mean, my main concern is from, November 9th through January when the new Congress takes their oath. That's my concern.
That would require then the Senate to basically say, look, we're going to put through a bunch of judicial appointments. We're going to ignore the process. We're going to basically have Vice President Harris camp out there in the Senate, and we're going to approve a bunch of these justices or judges, 50 with 51 votes. And that's, by the way, that means they're going to have to get every single Democrat to be on their side. And just so you know, there's no reason for Manchin to go along with them, because he's already, what they promised him for him approving the last big, huge spending bill, they've already reneged on it. So the question is, why would he then turn around and continue to support them in that?
Yeah. Let me get a comment in here real quick. Michael over on the Facebook side says it's going to be a red tsunami, not a wave. Again,
I'm hoping that red tsunami is not stopped at the Sierras, because unfortunately, every time there's been a red wave, it hasn't made it out of Nevada into California. So we're hoping you're right, and I'm hoping that you're right for the entire country, not just those east of the Sierras.
Yeah. I'm going to try to. This one I don't think will fit. Nope, it won't. I'm going to go ahead and read the whole thing. Michael also The New York Police Department will hold a public hearing on the proposed rules in person. Public hearing will take place at 10 a.m. November 18th on the auditorium on the first floor of One Police Plaza, a place I would want to avoid. Going to be a bullcrap hearing. Tell us this is it, take it or leave it. 47 pages of, and they think one hearing is going to address everything and hear everyone. Hopefully the court will find all these amendments unconstitutional. Yeah. I will. New York, the legal battles continue, and it's kind of going to have to be, Michael, just it's the same as our next stories about New Jersey. Both New York and New Jersey are going to be, we're just going to have to continue suing them into compliance. They're going to.
Well, I think until the courts start to stand up to these electeds and say, you are clearly and obviously ignoring the law. You're ignoring the rulings that are coming your way, and start holding them accountable. I mean, I'm sorry, but when you take out the oath of office, you swear to uphold the Constitution of whatever your state is, as well as the U.S. Constitution. And when you have the Supreme Court, who so clearly in New York Rifle and Pistol and V. Bruin told you what you can and you can't do. And then when you go and you do exactly the opposite, I'm sorry, but there needs to be some sort of consequence for the elected officials who choose to ignore the Constitution. That's what they're doing in New York. That's what they're doing in New Jersey. That's what they were trying to do in California. If they hadn't tried to put an urgency clause on it to require a 2/3 vote, they would have been successful in doing it in California. Somebody, and unfortunately the only people in the position right now is the Supreme Court, needs to stand up and just make it real clear. You do this, you go to jail. And tell the FBI if they do this, they need to be arrested and sent to federal prison.
I love that idea. You know, when back in the civil rights era in the 1960s, when Alabama didn't comply, eventually the federal government went down and took over the school system.
Right.
The Supreme Court needs to go take over the permitting system and take over legislature. You know, if you voted for this, guess what? You're out of office. See ya. Goodbye.
Yep.
I don't know if jail time's appropriate, but you're no longer a legislator. I hope you enjoyed your time.
I just, when you knowingly violate the Constitution, when you knowingly violate a court order, what happens to you and I if we knowingly and brazenly violate a court order?
We're locked up.
Penalty
It's called
in jail
contempt
time,
of court. Yeah.
Right. It's called contempt of court. We get locked up, and/or we face jail, and/or we get a fine. I'm sorry, but there needs to be some sort of a consequence. As long as they know that there's no consequence for them, they're going to keep doing it because it works with their constituents and it costs them nothing.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. 100%.
Yeah. They're seen as fighting the man.
One more story I want to get to today, and this one kind of makes my blood boil. It's written as police have new challenges under constitutional carry. Police saw Carmen Tussey walking briskly towards Louisville bar carrying a semi-automatic weapon. With people running away, officers moved in with service weapons drawn. They put the 26-year-old in handcuffs and confiscated his gun. Tussey was later charged with terroristic threatening, wanton endangerment, disorderly conduct, prosecutors said, and he could face 20 years in prison. His lawyer said he was engaged in perfectly legal behavior in the incident last year, raising a relatively new legal argument in the United States that now stands before the courts to settle. But the article goes on to say, well, he doesn't have to have a permit, so what law is he breaking? And oh my, now the police have to make snap judgments, and you know what? That's what police are hired to do. They're hired to decide, is this person a threat? And to take action to keep the public safe if the person is a threat. My understanding in this particular story, the guy was carrying a AR type rifle toward a bar, and yeah, I there's not a policeman in the world that I don't think would have intervened. So yeah, the attorney is paid to defend their client. They're going to say, look, there wasn't anything really illegal here. I'm just disappointed the media is jumping on it and saying, oh no, the police are in such a bad situation. Look, that's what police are paid to do.
Well, and you know what? Depending on the circumstances and what happened and how they engaged this individual, they made an assessment. Yeah. And now the individual is going to go to court, and it's going to be up to law enforcement to show all the facts that they made the proper assessment, that they went through whatever the steps are that they're trained to do, that they went through those steps and they did not just make a snap judgment, once again, by someone who was just walking down the street legally, openly carrying. I mean, because by the way, that could have been the fact. They could have just not. But once again, I don't know without knowing. Okay, well, was he yelling? Was he angry? Had he been in an altercation with somebody? Was he threatening anybody verbally? Did the law enforcement engage him and ask him to try to talk to him or anything like that? We don't know any of that stuff. Yeah. So it's a little hard to judge this at this point. So you can't say, well, he was just engaging in a constitutionally protected right, and you can't say that he was threatening people with a firearm. You don't know. We don't know until we see and hear all the facts.
Yeah, my home, Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Quite often, the local paper will tweet out. I get tweets for breaking local news, and anything they write is breaking local news, to the point where weapons violation. Somebody is carrying a pool cue and somebody else thought it might be a rifle. That's their weapons violation. Our local paper is that anti-gun. They want to push that the city is falling apart because we have constitutional carry and just anybody can carry anything. So this is just another. This is the News and Tribune that posted this one. Just another example of, oh my God, police, how can police do this? And yet, again, police are the only ones that should be entrusted with use of firearms.
Right. Well, you start by removing the assumption that just because someone is in possession of a firearm, they are a criminal or they are a bad guy. So that's the first thing that you've got to do, right? You got to make it so that law enforcement doesn't just jump to that decision. The other thing then you have to do is you have to have processes in place for law enforcement to, if they feel to observe and then if they determine the need to engage that individual without, once again, violating their rights, but at the same time seeking to find out if the person is a danger to themselves or others, because that's their job. I don't know exactly what those processes are, but I know that there are a lot of people who have spent a lot of time in law enforcement understanding best practices and developing best practices, and it's time that they start putting some of those best practices to use.
Amen. Gerald over on the Facebook side says open carry is legal in many areas, including Oregon, but expect to be stopped. It is reasonable. You know, I used to be an open carry guy. Now I'm thoroughly a concealed carry guy. But yeah, if you're walking around, depending on the firearm, if you're walking around with an AR or an AK openly displayed, you might want to expect to be talked to by an officer or a sheriff or a highway patrol or something. You're going to get contacted.
Well, here's the thing, and this is why, you know, a lot of times when I talk to people who do the open carry events, I'm very much along the lines of, look, the whole idea of an open carry event is to normalize the idea of possessing a firearm openly in public, rather than putting on all of your tactical gear and your vest and your tactical boots and all of that and walk around with an AR. How about you do this? How about you dress in your normal everyday clothes? and you have a firearm on your hip, or
Yep.
maybe you're wearing your jeans and your t-shirt, and you've got your AR or your AK slung over. The idea is to normalize it. Part of that is realizing that we need to kind of, we need to wing people into the idea of firearms being carried publicly. Maybe you don't always or start off carrying the semi-automatic rifle. Maybe you start with handguns, right? Then you open it up. But the idea, once again, is our goal should be to normalize it. But also we have to accept the fact that it's not normal right now. And when people do see you, and I know some people are saying, well, I shouldn't have to. You're right, you shouldn't. But here's the key. Do you want to be right or do you want to be effective?
Yes.
Is our goal? If our goal is to normalize it, then let's dress like we normally do.
Or even a little better.
Normalize it. Or even a little better, right. And let's normalize it, right? Push the envelope a little bit. By the way, folks, that's how the anti-gunners got us to where we are right now. They didn't do it through big sweeping changes. They did it one small step at a time, and they normalized the anti-gun attitude. Well, all we're saying is, if we're going to be effective in taking it back, well, then we've got to do the same exact thing. Incrementalism works.
Yes. I want to, as we go, we're over time, so before I hand it off to ask what you're wanting to pitch today, I want to say to our viewers, I screwed up yesterday. I thought that today was the day I wasn't going to be on the air as we were talking yesterday. It's actually tomorrow is the day. Tomorrow is a rally with Glenn Youngkin from Virginia, Kristi Noem, of course my governor here in South Dakota, and Tulsi Gabbard is going to be stumping for Kristi Noem here, and I've been invited to take part as part of the media. So I will not be here tomorrow. I thought that was today, but I was wrong yesterday. It's actually tomorrow. There will be no bullet tomorrow, and then Thursday, Friday, we continue on. Craig, on our way out the door, man, anything you want to plug?
Just make sure you check out the rundown. It's 2A News, conservative views. We talk about politics. We talk about the Second Amendment. I'm always joined with Mike Piwowarski, the host of Arms Room Radio. You see him here every Thursday here on The Bullet. But check us out. You can find us on YouTube, Facebook, OpsLens, Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcast. We have an audio version of the program. It's live 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern.
Very cool. Folks, that is going to do it for us today. Come join me Thursday at 5 p.m. Central Time when Mike Piwowarski will be here with me, and we'll cover the Second Amendment news of the day. Until then, everybody, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.